If you have eaten anything today, a piece of bread, a yogurt, a handful of cereal, you have already consumed something your brain processed exactly the same way it processes cocaine. Not metaphorically, neurochemically. The mechanism is nearly identical. Sugar is the only substance on Earth that is simultaneously a macronutrient your body needs, a drug your brain becomes dependent on, and a legally unregulated addictive compound that is deliberately engineered into almost every processed food sold in the world. And the industry that did this knew exactly what they were doing, decades before the public had any idea. This is not a story about sweetness. It is a story about neuroscience, corporate manipulation, and the most successful addiction campaign in human history. One that is still running right now in your kitchen, in your child's lunchbox, and in the offices of the world's largest food companies. The moment sugar hits your tongue, specialized taste receptors send an immediate signal to the brain's reward center, the nucleus accumbens. Dopamine floods the system. The feeling is not pleasure exactly. It is the anticipation of reward, the same signal triggered by nicotine, alcohol, and opioids. The bliss point. In the 1970s, a mathematician working for the U.S. Army named Howard Moskowitz was hired to find the optimal concentration of sugar in chocolate pudding for military rations. He discovered that there is a precise sugar level, not too little, not too much, at which the brain's reward response peaks without triggering satiety. He called it the bliss point. Within years, every major food company in America was using his methodology to engineer their products to hit it exactly. The tolerance loop. Like any drug, repeated sugar consumption reduces the brain's dopamine sensitivity over time. You need more to feel the same reward. This is not a character flaw or a lack of willpower. It is a measurable neurological adaptation, the same mechanism that drives tolerance in heroin addiction, documented in peer-reviewed neuroscience since the early 2000s. The rat studies. In 2007, French neuroscientist Serge Ahmed offered rats a choice between intravenous cocaine and water sweetened with saccharin. Over 90% of the rats chose the sweet water. Even rats that were already cocaine addicted switched. The study was largely ignored by mainstream media. The food industry never mentioned it. For 99% of human evolutionary history, sweet meant safe. In a world without supermarkets, sweetness signaled ripe fruit, calories, vitamins, energy. Bitter often meant poison. The brain evolved to treat sweetness as an urgent priority signal. Consume this now before someone else does. The scarcity that no longer exists. That evolutionary wiring made perfect sense when sweet foods were rare, seasonal, and hard to obtain. A piece of wild fruit in summer was a genuine survival opportunity. The brain had no reason to evolve an off switch for something that was never available in unlimited quantities, until now. The mismatch problem. The modern food environment is the first in human history to offer unlimited sweet calories at zero effort, available 24 hours a day. The brain running ancient survival software in a modern abundance environment is not broken. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do, in conditions it was never designed for. Etymology bomb. The word sugar traces through Arabic sucker, Persian shakar, and Sanskrit sharkata, meaning gravel or grit, describing the crystalline texture of the first refined product. The sweetest substance in the modern diet has a name that describes sand. By the 1960s, the major American food companies, Coca-Cola, General Foods, Nabisco, Kellogg's, had internal research divisions staffed with neuroscientists, psychologists, and food engineers whose explicit job was to understand why people craved certain foods and how to amplify that craving. The internal language. declassified internal documents from several major food companies obtained through litigation and investigative journalism over the past 2 decades reveal that company scientists used the words craveability, addictiveness, and compulsive consumption in internal memos as early as the 1970s, language that would never appear in their public communications. The cereal engineering scandal. A former General Foods scientist testified in a 2012 legal proceeding that the company's breakfast cereal division ran dedicated studies in the 1980s specifically designed to identify the sugar concentration that maximized repeat purchasing behavior in children. The studies were never published. The cereals went to market. The flavor industry's role. A parallel industry, flavor houses like Givaudan and International Flavors and Fragrances developed proprietary flavor enhancers designed to work synergistically with sugar to extend the dopamine response beyond what sugar alone could achieve. It was engineered to be that way. In 1967, the Sugar Research Foundation paid 3 Harvard scientists the equivalent of $50,000 today to publish a review in the New England Journal of Medicine exonerating sugar and blaming dietary fat for heart disease. The funding was not disclosed. The study shaped U.S. nutritional policy for 30 years. Millions of people died on low-fat diets that replaced fat with sugar. The industry knew. The tobacco parallel is not a metaphor. When tobacco companies faced existential regulatory threat in the 1950s, they created the Tobacco Industry Research Organization, a front organization designed to fund friendly science, manufacture doubt, and delay regulation. When the sugar industry faced similar pressure in the 1970s, it created an almost structurally identical organization called the International Sugar Research Foundation. Same playbook, different substance, same result. Decades of delay. Children as the primary target. Internal marketing documents from multiple major food companies released through U.S. Federal Trade Commission proceedings in the 1970s and again in the 2000s show explicit strategies for targeting children under age 8 before the prefrontal cortex develops the capacity to distinguish advertisement from reality and before brand loyalty is fully formed. The goal, stated plainly in the documents, was to create lifetime customers before the age of 10. The school infiltration. Coca-Cola and PepsiCo signed exclusive pouring rights contracts with thousands of American school districts through the 1990s and 2000s, paying schools millions of dollars for the right to be the sole beverage provider on campus. In some contracts, schools received bonuses tied to sales volume. The incentive was to sell more sugar to captive children during the school day. Some of those contracts are still active. The WHO confrontation. In 2003, the World Health Organization published guidelines recommending that added sugar comprised no more than 10% of daily caloric intake. The U.S. sugar industry sent a letter to the U.S. Secretary of Health threatening to lobby Congress to withdraw U.S. funding from the WHO, $406 million annually, if the guidelines were not revised. The guidelines were quietly softened. Scale shock. The average American consumes approximately 17 teaspoons of added sugar per day, nearly 3 times the WHO recommended limit. That's 57 pounds of added sugar per person per year. Poured into a bathtub, it would fill it to the rim every year per person. The diabetes epidemic. In 1958, approximately 1.5 million Americans had diagnosed diabetes. Today, that number is 37 million, a 2,400% increase over 65 years, during which the U.S. population roughly doubled. The timeline maps almost perfectly onto the rise of processed food and the industrialization of added sugar. The global export of the problem.
As Western food companies expanded into Asia, Africa, and Latin America from the 1980s onward, they brought their sugar engineering playbook with them. Countries that had negligible obesity and diabetes rates in 1980, Mexico, Brazil, China, and India, now face public health crises on a scale that their healthcare systems were never designed to handle. The addiction was exported along with the product. The economic cost. The American Diabetes Association estimates the total economic burden of diabetes in the United States at $327 billion annually in direct medical costs and lost productivity. That's larger than the GDP of Denmark. A significant portion of that cost is attributable to dietary sugar and is being paid by taxpayers and patients, while the companies that engineered the craving continue to post record profits.
Mexico's soda tax, introduced in 2014, reduced consumption of sugary drinks by 12% in the first year and 20% among the heaviest consumers, the people most at risk. It was the first large-scale proof that sugar consumption responds to price signals exactly the way tobacco consumption does. The industry spent millions fighting it. The UK sugar levy, 2018. Before the tax even took effect, major drinks manufacturers reformulated 50% of their products to fall below the tax threshold, reducing sugar content voluntarily, something they had insisted for decades was technically impossible without destroying flavor. It took a tax to discover that it was not impossible at all. The willpower myth. Framing sugar overconsumption as a personal failure of discipline is, neuroscientists now argue, as scientifically inaccurate as blaming a smoker for being addicted to nicotine. The substance is engineered to override the brain's natural satiety signals. Telling people to simply eat less sugar without changing the food environment is like filling a city with cigarette vending machines and then running public health campaigns about personal responsibility. The reformulation frontier. Food scientists working outside the industry are now developing sugar reduction technologies. Slow-release sugar structures, flavor modulators that trick sweetness receptors at lower concentrations, and fermentation processes that reduce sugar content without altering taste. The science that was used to engineer addiction is being redirected to undo it. Sugar did not become the most consumed addictive substance on Earth by accident. It got there because a group of very intelligent people spent 50 years studying your brain, finding its vulnerabilities, and engineering a product designed to exploit them. Then spent another 50 years making sure you blamed yourself for the result. The next time you reach for something sweet and feel like you can't stop, that is not weakness. That is a measured, predictable neurological response to a product that was scientifically designed to produce exactly that feeling. The bliss point was calculated. The craving was engineered. You were the experiment. If this changed the way you'll read a nutrition label tomorrow, subscribe. There's a lot more hidden in the things you were never supposed to question.